would like to welcome all those who are visiting with us this morning, some new friends and as well as some old friends, and I'm especially happy, as I'm sure every parent is happy when their child, after a long absence from church, comes back and attends Mass. So I want to welcome my daughter, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
And I was messing with her, for the last few weeks. I've been saying, have you turned atheist? I haven't seen you at church for a while. Oh no, I still hold the faith. Well, it's good to come and visit church once in a while since she's here. I'm happy about that. Thank you, Tiara, for coming. And she brought her boyfriend, Cody. So welcome, Cody. And I'm also, it's a double treat for me this morning because I'm thrilled to see our sisters, Tammy and her mom here this morning. Candy, it's great to have you here this morning. And it's like a reunion. That's what I love about Lent. More people come to church at Lent than I think at any other time of year, so I look forward to it because I get to see everybody, it seems. So thank you for coming, because as we gather together in community and pray, we touch the depths of what it means to be human, what it means to be in communion with one another, and what it means to encounter the divine presence. The presence of the Lord is always with us at all times and all places. There's nowhere you can go to escape the divine presence of God. God is not unmindful of you. And that is what the apostle was telling us when he writes this letter to the Romans, that nothing shall ever separate you from the love of Christ. No matter how difficult and challenging life is, no matter what kind of pain or disappointment we experience, no matter what failure or success we encounter in life, we are never, ever alone. And when we gather together on Sunday morning, we are acknowledging that fact. We are acknowledging the fact that God has a place in our lives, that we live and move and have our being in that one eternal God who in his own divine wisdom and for purposes known to him only has dared to call us into being and into existence. So it's good that you're here. That is the message of the apostle. On this second Sunday of our Lenten journey, the readings this morning, particularly the first reading, the story of Abraham and Isaac, and then the second, or the gospel reading in which Jesus ascends the mountain of Transfiguration with his disciples. We are confronted with two very strange yet iconic stories from the Bible. I say strange because when you read these stories or listen to them being read to you with mindfulness and attentiveness, the story will strike you as very peculiar and very strange. Both of the stories. The two stories have one thing in common, and that is they take place on a mountaintop. When God spoke to Abraham nearly 4 millennia ago, that is 4,000 years ago, on one occasion, Abraham, being a very aged man, was hearing the voice of God say to him, and it was the God of Abraham, the God whose name was known to Abraham as El Shaddai. El Shaddai means God of the mountains. That's the God that Abraham worshipped. That's the talking God who spoke to Abraham. And so El Shaddai comes to Abraham one day and speaks to him, and the narrator, the writer of the text, tells us, in order to test Abraham. And he says to Abraham, I want you to take your son. You know, the son that you love. The son after your own heart, Isaac, whose name means laughter. I want you to take him out onto a very high mountain, and I want you to build an altar for me there, and I want you to place your son on the altar, and I want you to make a sacrifice of him unto me. What did Abraham do? I'm a father, what would I do? There have been times when I felt like sacrificing my I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. In silence, Abraham proceeds to take his son Isaac. He had his servants put bits of wood on the beast of burden, the donkey, and then they proceeded on a long journey from their encampment in the Terebinth of Memrah, and they then ascended into the high mountains of the Judean wilderness. And there on top of the mountains called Moriah, Abraham built an altar out of uncut stone. He placed the wood upon the altar. And as they were silently proceeding to this site, his young son Isaac spoke up. "Are we there yet? You know, we're going to worship the Lord on this mountain, Daddy, but where's the sacrifice?" And at this moment, Abraham breaks his silence and says, "My son, the Lord will provide the sacrifice." So Isaac had no idea of the intentions of his father. They go to the mountain, and then after he had built this altar and laid the wood upon it, he then binds up his son and places him on the altar. And in obedience to the command that God gave to him, Abraham raises the dagger and is about ready to plunge it into the heart of his son, making a sacrifice, a shoah, a holocaust, a burnt offering unto the Lord. And just when he's about to plunge that knife into his son's chest, an angel comes and prevents him from doing it. And Abraham is prevented from killing his son and offering his son as a human sacrifice to El Shaddai. Isn't that a strange story? And then there was a ram caught in the thicket of the thorns. Kind of reminds you, it's a foreshadowing of the crown of thorns. And there that ram is taken and sacrificed instead, and they worship the Lord, Father and Son together. We are told that El Shaddai did this in order to test the faith of Abraham. But did God need to do this? Did God need to seek for answers to questions that he didn't know the answer to? Did God need to put Abraham to this test so that God somehow, like a scientist doing an experiment, will be able to see whether or not Abraham was going to be obedient to him or not? Was this a test so God could find out something that God didn't know before? Well, nothing could be further from the truth, because God already had that information according to the Hebraic understanding of God being all-knowing. So the test was for Abraham himself. Abraham needed to know for himself if he had sufficient faith and love for the God who was speaking to him. Did Abraham indeed love the God who called him out of his homeland and brought him to this strange land to be a stranger in a strange land, a foreigner among foreign peoples? Did Abraham have the same kind of devotion to his God as the Canaanites of the land of Israel had to their gods? After all, human sacrifice was a common practice in the ancient world. In fact, there's very few human cultures that did not, at one time or another, practice this horrendous action of sacrificing their children unto divine beings. And so the Canaanites, when they were in times of great difficulty or famine, would make the ultimate sacrifice to their gods, be it Moloch or the god Baal, and they would offer their firstborn children in sacrifice, which was followed by a meal, which would have been cannibalism. This practice of human sacrifice has been universally present in the experience of human culture. Even as recently as 500 years ago, an entire advanced civilization, the Aztec civilization, practiced human sacrifice on a daily basis until the Spaniards came and conquered them and put an end to this ghastly practice. Even in some remote parts of the South Pacific and on islands where there are peoples and cultures far removed from modern civilization, this practice still exists, I am told. It's a strange practice, and don't think that we as descendants of the great European civilization are somehow immune to it. My ancestors, the Celtic people, practiced human sacrifice on a regular basis. And not only that, but so are those people of German descent practiced human sacrifice. It is a strange practice indeed. It was a way of showing one's ultimate devotion to their God. And the expectation was, if I sacrifice my firstborn, surely this god or goddess will hear my prayer and respond with some kindness in return. So this was a ghastly practice that was around in the ancient world. And so now Abraham is asked to do the same thing as the pagans did. But then when he got there and demonstrated his willingness to do that, God prevents him. So this iconic story, the story that's filled with such great symbolism for us, says to us that the God of Abraham no longer or does not require us to offer human sacrifice in order to placate a supposed wrath or anger that he may have towards you. God is not asking us to sacrifice our firstborn. God is not asking us to perform human sacrifice. That is the message. It was a polemic, an attack upon the common religious practices of the ancient world. This God, El Shaddai, is different. He has another way. But there's something else that makes this story iconic for us. Because we know of one who did sacrifice his son, his beloved one. And so now we move to the story of the New Testament. The story that is recorded for us in the pages of the Gospel according to St. Mark. Jesus now ascends the mountain, Mount Tabor, the Mount of Transfiguration, which overlooks the Sea of Galilee. It is to the west of the Sea of Galilee. He climbs the mountain, and among all his disciples, he chooses 3 to accompany him. Peter, James, and John, the inner circle. Jesus' closest and most intimate of friends. He takes them with him to the top of the mountain. And they thought there was nothing unusual about this because Jesus oftentimes would go to the top of the mountain to pray and sometimes take a few of his disciples. And so he does this. And they accompany him. But on this occasion, something very strange and bizarre happens. And I say bizarre, and I think that's a correct way to state this because the experience is beyond anything that anyone could have expected or even imagined. And as they're on the top of this mountain, at the summit of Mount Tabor, all of a sudden the disciples behold and they detect a change in Jesus. Something is happening to him. It's beyond words to describe, but what they do tell us in the economy of words that they give to us is that Jesus began to change in their very presence. All of a sudden there was a bright light, brighter than the sun, that began to shine forth from the very body of Jesus. It's as though the light, the uncreated light of his divinity, began to show through the threads of his humanity. His humanity could no longer contain the divinity and the divine life that was with him, and it shone forth in all of its glory and all of its brightness. And the disciples had to shield their eyes, for such was the brightness of his countenance. And they were overwhelmed, and they fell to the ground as if they were dead. I am quite certain that if I was there or you were there, we would do much the same. What was happening here? What was going on? They were having a revelation. They were having an epiphany. They were gaining a glimpse into the interior life of divinity. They were seeing something about Jesus that they had never seen before. The light of his divinity shone through on that day on the summit of Mount Tabor. What is the meaning of this? And then, if that were not enough, I think that I would like to say that the light that shone through Jesus that day was a light that was always shining. They just never saw it before. You see, there's a veil over our eyes. We see things in a certain way. And we don't realize that everything isn't as it appears. And it wasn't so much that Jesus all of a sudden began to glow in the dark, as some of our glow-in-the-dark Jesus statues do. But rather, something that was innate and always present was now revealed to them. It was not that Jesus changed so much as the disciples' perception of Jesus changed. The veil was removed from their eyes and they had a glimpse into his divinity. And if that were not enough, a great cloud came over them and accompanied and engulfed them. A great cloud which every Jewish person would have understood its meaning. The great cloud is the Shekinah glory. The presence, the holy presence of the Holy One. The presence of El Shaddai. The presence of Yahweh. The presence of the God of their ancestors, who, when manifest, would manifest as a dark cloud. It did so for Abraham. It did so on Mount Sinai in the presence of Moses and the people of Israel. It did so when Solomon dedicated the temple. At these significant moments in the history of Israel, the great cloud of God's presence would be manifest. And so, James, John, and Peter, they understood, as well as being terrified, that they were in the presence. That's all they would say, the presence. And you knew who they were talking about. They were in the presence and engulfed by the presence of God. It was the veil that was lifted from their eyes, and they beheld the glory of God in their midst. Now, they were stunned into silence. But some people are uncomfortable with silence. You know the type. You know, something has happened, an experience so profound that you have nothing really to say, because nothing in human language can capture the meaning of the experience we're having. You have experiences like that. But in every crowd, there's always someone who's uncomfortable with silence. They got to say something. In this case, it was Peter. He just had to say something. He was too uncomfortable in all this and too uncomfortable with the silence. So he opens his mouth and he says, "Oh, this is wonderful. It's nice to be here, Jesus. Hey, I noticed that Elijah, these two personages of Moses and Elijah, are appearing by your side, on either side of you." And I don't know how they recognized Moses and Elijah, but somehow they did. And Jesus was having a conversation with Moses and Elijah as if the disciples were not there. And so Peter speaks forward. "I know what we can do. We can build you a shrine. In fact, we'll build one for Moses. We'll build one for Elijah. And we'll build one for you. And this will be a holy site, and we can charge admission." And the writer says, Peter did not know what he was saying. And then another voice is heard, coming from the cloud of the presence. It's the voice of the Father. In the gospel narratives, the Father only speaks 3 times. Once at the baptism of Jesus, when he speaks to Jesus and says, "You are my beloved Son. In you I am well pleased." He speaks to Jesus at the very end of his ministry when he's in the temple. And Jesus prays to the Father, "Glorify your name." And the Father speaks, "I have glorified it and will glorify it again." But on the Mount of Transfiguration, the Father speaks. And he's not speaking to Jesus. He is addressing the 3. He is addressing you and I, Peter, James, and John. And he says this, the witness of the Father, we all must attend at this moment to hear what he says, because he's speaking it to you at this very moment, my brother and my sister. "This is my Son, my beloved one." Isn't that a touching translation? My beloved one. The one whom I dearly love. And in that statement, we gain a glimpse into the inner life of the Blessed Trinity. That the persons of the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, are held together in a bond of love that is so deep, so tender, and so ever intimate. And we hear the Father speaking of his Son in these very endearing terms. "This is my Son, the one whom I love, my beloved." We don't hear language like that except between lovers, you know. It would be inappropriate to speak like that to anyone else except one that you were sharing your common life with. It is just too intimate. It is too close. It is a place where there is full disclosure between the lovers in that relationship. And so this is the language that God uses. This kind of romantic language. This language of intimacy. This language of deep love. My beloved. That is what he says. And then he goes on to say this to you and me today, as he said to Peter, James, and John 2,000 years ago. Listen to him. Listen to my Son, whom I love with all my heart. Listen to him. That is a command. It's in the imperative. It means we must do this. That is the call of every disciple. That is the call that's upon you, even as you sit in this church at this moment. You are commanded by God, your Creator, who called you into being, to listen to his beloved Son. And as Peter, James, and John heard that, they noticed that Moses was there. Moses, who is the author in their minds and according to their tradition of Torah, the law. And there was Elijah, who was the prince of the prophets. God spoke through Moses. God spoke through the prophets. But now God speaks to his people through his beloved Son. You have listened to Moses. Very good. You have listened to the prophets. But now the time has arrived that you must listen to my Son. Hear his voice. And do what he calls you and tells you to do. This is the message of Transfiguration. Not only that, but the Transfiguration is a foreshadowing of that which awaits Jesus in his resurrection. And not only that, but it is a promise and a foreshadowing of the glory that we will participate in. Despite hardship, pain, loss, even death itself, the day will come, my brothers and sisters, that we will be caught up in the very glory of God, and we shall shine brightly with them. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, in that great glory of endless love. That is the message of the Transfiguration. And the Transfiguration, the light of Christ shining in us, is happening even now. It begins within your heart. Because you see, my brothers and sisters, we're saved from the inside out. If the light of Christ shines within your heart, bringing you enlightenment and illumination, that light shall shine forever in that place of glory. That place of which we cannot even imagine, but a place that really is ultimately your destination, my destination, the destination of God's beloved humanity. And that is what the gospel says to us today. That's the end of my homily.